my wife's my love of my life, but if I had a second, it would be this farm. And
I can tell.
It's just been awesome.
Yeah, when I saw the post that showed it, and then I saw that you said you come in and you pay whatever you want to pay.
Yeah.
Right? And
yeah. If you have money, you can pay. We'll take your money.
Right.
But if you don't have money, just take the produce.
Yeah. No questions asked. They just take.
You either pay or you don't.
Delicious fruit.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I teared up a little.
There's no conversation.
In this episode, you'll get to know David Bezzant, the Charitable Mobility VP, and you'll hear the story of how he went from selling phones in a Walmart to becoming a national vice president for T-Mobile. I'm Dave Crenshaw, and this is my Success Project.
Welcome back, friends, to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. This is the show where I'm teaching my children how to be successful through the life stories of others, but you get to come along for the ride no matter what your age is. In case this is your first time here and you don't know who I am, I'm a best-selling author. I speak around the world to Fortune 500 companies, and I've helped millions of people be successful through my online courses, particularly my courses on LinkedIn Learning. With this show, I wanted to create something a little bit different. It's sort of a legacy project where I gather the stories of some of the most successful people I've met throughout my life, and I look for principles that I can pass on to my children to help them be successful, and thought you would want to hear that journey as well. Now, as I choose guests for this show, I'm very particular about who I interview because I want to have people who don't have success in just one part of their life, but many. And today's guest is someone who I've gotten to know for quite a while, and he truly has multifaceted success. It's not just about his career. It's not just about money. He has achieved a lot of other wonderful things with his family and how he gives back to the community. Before I get into introducing my guest, and we're here at my office right now in Salt Lake City. We're here together, which is kind of fun. I want to ask you to do one thing in particular. As you listen to my guest, I want you to look for one thing you can do, one action you can take to make David Bezzant a part of your life. You don't have to do everything you hear. What you want to do is just find one action that you can take today or tomorrow so that you make his story a part of your life forever. And today's guest is certainly, he is someone that you want a part of your life. He's had a huge impact in my life. David M. Bezzant is the National Vice President of T-Mobile for Government with over 25 years of experience in wireless communications. He is on the Washington, D.C. USO Advisory Board and is a John Jay College of Criminal Justice Veteran Roundtable member. David is the chair of T-Mobile's Public Sector Advisory Board. David finds pride in giving back to his community in various ways, from Project 10 Million to Connecting Heroes, and helping others is a big part of his DNA, and it has been for his whole life. He even runs, this is my favorite thing, he even runs an urban fruit farm where he provides fresh produce to families in need. David is also a father of three and an individual who's committed to the bright future of America. Dave, it's so great to hang out with you again in person.
It's been a long time, and it's good to see you. I feel like I've seen you just watching, your series on LinkedIn, which is really cool. Seeing you on social media and doing the Where is Dave Crenshaw around the world. And so I can't believe we both live in the same state, but we haven't seen each other probably in 15 years. And so
which is crazy. Which is crazy because there was a while where we were seeing each other all the time, and then life happens, right? And everything goes on.
Anybody who doesn't live 5 minutes in proximity, I think life goes like that.
Right. Or you work with on a daily basis. Right.
Yeah.
So, all right, Dave, your story is truly unique, I think, in these days in terms of the consistency of what you've done and the loyalty behind it. But I'm kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I always like to ask everyone the same question to start, which is, when you were a teenager, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, David, it's such a good question. There's a couple of things that I wanted to be. Let me start before the teenager and just give some background
Please.
on, me. So I grew up in a pretty small community And my grandfather worked at a steel plant. He worked at Geneva Steel as a guard for burn security. So when you would enter the plant in gatehouse number 1, which, by the way, is now a really cool furniture store named after that gatehouse. Nice. It's a really incredible place, but it's named after this shack that my grandfather, worked at. And so he would go and do that at night, working graveyard shifts. And in the day, he was a fruit farmer. So he had 2 separate farms, one where his home was, which was a smaller farm. And then the farm where I lived, we literally lived on this orchard, was there. And I sort of grew up where packaged candy was cool. Okay. And so other kids would get a treat, they'd go to the swimming pool and get a treat. And I always had an apple or a pear, and that wasn't cool at the time. Okay. Rolling back, and by the way, now it's super cool. If you have organic fruit or whatever, right. It's sure. It's now a premium, but I grew up working for anything that had school clothes or whatever. I was often dirty. And my dad was a math teacher originally, then a high school counselor. And we had 6 kids in the family. And so to make money, my dad had to do yard work or mowing lawns and things like that. My dad was pretty smart. He mowed Marie Osmond's lawn. He mowed Jim Burr, who owned a helicopter company's lawn. He mowed the Rooneys, who owned New Skin. And then Dr. Blaine Hershey, who was a famous plastic surgeon. Those were the lawns that we had, plus Quail Valley Condominiums, which is above Timpview High School.
So he was making a lot of connections while doing something pretty basic.
He was, and he needed help. And I think I was a big enough problem for my mom at age 5 and 6 with 4 sisters that I was bugging them, that they kicked me out of the house and basically said, not literally, but said, in the day, you got to go with your dad and you got to work. And so since I was 5 years old, I was always either mowing a lawn or working in an orchard.
Wow.
For monetary. And my dad did a great job of setting me up. And there were Casio watches that had video games and calculators.
Oh, I remember those.
Yeah, they sold them at Ace Hardware. And my dad would take me and I'd see they were $15. And so he would set up reward systems for me to work. And so I just set that up for what I wanted to do when I was a teenager. So I worked my whole life since I was 5. And never took that for granted, constantly hot, constantly dirty. And working at those luxury properties that I just mentioned of the Osmonds and whatever, made me believe I was poor. We weren't poor, but it made me believe I was poor because we didn't have a swimming pool, let alone 2 swimming pools, an indoor and outdoor. And I would see, the kids leaving in their convertible VW Rabbits with a polo sweater tied over their, and yeah, Can't Buy Me Love did come out. And that was inspiration for me because he mowed lawns. So back to the question of what I wanted to be when I was a teenager, I believed I either wanted to do one of 2 things. One was be a lawyer. The second was to be a small engine mechanic of lawnmowers and motorcycles and things like that. And so I looked at kind of both of those, and the lawyer thing fell apart pretty quick because they did a career day. And I thought that was a Perry Mason courtroom, which I still would love to do. By the way, I would totally dig being in that setting.
Yeah,
a fact and argument. But it's not. They showed me all the paperwork that lawyers do. And by the way, huge respect to any lawyer because you're super important. And the documentation that you do is good. It just wasn't my thing. And then the busting knuckles, having huge respect. I still love mechanics. I still love small engines and outdoor equipment and things like that. But those 2 things fell apart. But that's what I thought I would want to do when I was a teenager.
That's fascinating to me because when I first met you, and we were around at age 19,
20, yeah.
That was not my perception of you. Because what I saw was somebody who, it almost looked like you were mainlining Napoleon Hill and Zig Ziglar and those guys. You were so attached to motivational literature. You were a guy who was highly motivational, extremely positive. I was like, man, this guy is the most self-motivated / educated about all things success person I've ever met in my life. That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
So where did that come from? Was that coming from your father, your parents, or was that something that just you yourself gravitated towards?
Yeah, I don't know. I've always had drive. I was born with drive. My mom said they would put a book in front of me and a ball in front of me, and I'd go for the ball 100% of the time. And academia did not interest me in ages 0 through 18 at all. But there are a few things, I've always played an underdog role in life because I sort of had to grow up, and I was never cool in high school. I was never the best athlete. I definitely didn't have the tools and resources. I remember trying to make money to have the right diet and eat and work on fitness. And there was a defining moment for me. We moved to a small town, North St. Pete, which is Mount Pleasant. Manti's a rival, by the way. So if anybody who lived there heard me say that, they'd be upset.
We've got a lot of Manti listeners on this show. I mean, just a ton of them.
Hey, the Templars, down there. But my dad took a role as a principal, at the high school. And we were not well liked when we went there. We were outsiders, and we just didn't fit in. And there was a kid named Jason Lee. And Jason Lee, I know he could bench press 315 pounds, and he worked out with it. And I was super thin and weak as a freshman. I was 4 years younger than him. And I went to the high school gym, and I was trying to be a part of the football team and didn't know anybody. And I did my very, very first weights workout. And they put me through a pretty rigorous routine. In fact, I think it was inappropriate for a first-time weightlifter. And then they moved me from regular bench press to incline bench press. And I went to go an incline bench press, and I went to go push it up, and it was just the bar. There were no weights on it. And instead of the bar going up, it went out because, one, I hadn't done it before, and two, I was super, super fatigued, and it went out and it hit my legs. And a bunch of people started to make fun of me and started to laugh at me, when that happened. And in the corner, Jason Lee, I think, no kids had facial hair, but I think he actually had a mustache at the time. He stood up and he yelled at every single person in that gym, but he told people to be quiet, essentially in different terminology, and that everybody starts from somewhere. And 30 years later, I'll never forget that. And so some of those same guys took me in and really helped me start to work on my health and fitness. And so I got to a point where I ended up working out every single day for probably 4 years and gained a lot of strength in doing it and worked on my diet. And that gave me a lot of confidence. When I got to 19 and 20, I wouldn't miss for Christmas or a birthday, by the way. And by the way, we worked out too much. And so that had me overly confident. Back in those days, getting in fights was supposedly cool, not cool at all, but it was supposedly cool. And so that was sort of an ego thing for me to get strong and to have confidence. And then I ended up interning for GE Healthcare, and I had a chance to watch, some incredible individuals there and learn a lot. And so before I ended up doing a service mission, which is where you and I had met,
right,
I was sort of coming off of learning from these people who at the time made $500,000 and $700,000 a year in their jobs. And this was in the 90s, and that wasn't very common. I mean, today's terms, that's probably $2 million, $2.5 million in an annual income. So when you met me, it was sort of an accumulation of that stuff of confidence and whatever. And I was not going to do a church service mission. In fact,
Really? Sorry, let me explain my surprise, because in our culture at that age, it's pretty expected. It's not mandatory, but there really is such a high expectation, pressure, whatever you want to call it, that's going to happen. So that's why I reacted like that.
No, yeah. Everybody went and did that. And I was the only one that didn't go. I went a year late because one, I'm a nice person, but I'm very authentic, meaning if I say it, I mean it. And I was not about to go and talk about things that I didn't necessarily fully believe in. I was skeptical, and I didn't know the impact, and I didn't want to leave my lifestyle because I was doing college. I had a job, had a girlfriend, and to leave all that for 2 years and go and knock on people's doors and wash their windows and rake their leaves and help them with stop smoking workshops. I didn't know, if it fit that portfolio. So when I met you, I was probably coming off of that. And so I probably was really well prepared to be tough and to be motivated.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it came off well, but I have a lot of regrets too about my behavior on my mission. And so it's interesting.
Well, I think we all have, and I don't think it's just a mission thing too. I think we all have regrets about who we were when we were 19 and 20 in some of the choices that we made. I mean, certainly I think of the choices you can make, that's a pretty good one. But right, the behaviors that take place. But my perception, again, was not here's a guy who was struggling with these things. It was here's a guy who's got these things figured out. Part of it is probably that maturity. But there's a moment that I haven't talked to you about before.
Yeah.
That has always stuck with me. This is really interesting because we sometimes frequented the same place, like the office headquarters.
Oh, yeah.
We were in
yeah.
Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And I remember finding like a piece of paper that you had accidentally left somewhere. I don't know how I knew it was your handwriting, but I knew it was your handwriting. And you had written the names of people that we associated with, and then you had written a positive attribute of each of those people. Is this ringing a bell at all?
No, I did write a lot though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what struck me about that and what was a motivational moment for me was, man, here's a guy who's really taking the time to get to know people and get to know how to compliment them and build them up and edify them. Talk to me a little bit about where that came from, that desire to always build people up. I've never been with you where you're not like helping people feel good about who they are and the choices that they're making.
Yeah, a couple things that I think it comes from. First of all, life is really beautiful and life has lots of painful moments. And don't get me wrong, there's a large majority of people who have been through insanely painful things. And this is going to sound odd, but there's a beauty to it because it's life and it's challenge, it's struggle. But, again, I'm a kid who had to earn every piece of clothing I ever got and every single thing that I ever got. And was, on a Friday night when everybody else was at the movies and at the pool or with their friends and working. And then Saturday mornings I was, out and working. So every window. So I'm that person. And in life, it feels like maybe you have a million different lives in different windows, and so
explain that. It's a very interesting concept.
Well, right now I may rank as wealthy and my income level, and
you've achieved that.
Well, I've done well, but who am I? And I'm not that. I'm the kid that mowed your lawn. I'm the kid that had to work for, whatever it is. And so, everybody matters. And if you're often, overlooked, like I'll never forget the Hershey's, Blaine Hershey. He was a famous plastic surgeon, and his wife was incredibly nice to me. And so I'd be out mowing the lawn, and I remember that they had like full video games. This was in the 80s. They had full video games in their home, and they had an indoor pool. And after I'd get done mowing the lawn, now remember, I'm the yard person. And they'd say, hey, do you want to come in and come swimming in our pool? Or do you want to come and play Pac-Man? And this is at a window where you'd have to have 20, 25 cents. They would say, do you want to come in and eat with me? And just sit down. And the way that they treated me was exceptional. And it didn't matter what my role was. It didn't matter if my drink was the garden hose out back and an apple from our farm. And that was my meal for the day. They treated me really well. And I remember, I'll never forget that they had like all the coolest cars and stuff. And it was super aspirational. And so, it was interesting because they passed in a plane crash, and I saw their home and it was up for sale. And I realized that I could pay cash for their home if I wanted to as a second or third home. And it sort of hit me in life of like, wow, I've come full circle in a place where like I'm in a position of potential power or influence, but I don't care.
No matter what your career is, your foundation of success begins with one thing: effective time management. And thanks to the generosity of Microsoft, you can get my entire course, Time Management Fundamentals, for free on LinkedIn Learning. Go to davegift.com to get your free access now. This is the course that millions around the world have used to become more productive and reduce stress. Everyone from Fortune 500 executives to freelancers to students. Now, it's the same coaching I've provided in person for tens of thousands of dollars per day, but you can get it for free on LinkedIn Learning. You don't need to provide anything to access it. No credit card, no email. Just go to davegift.com and start learning. Thank you so much, Microsoft and LinkedIn Learning, for your partnership. davegift.com.
Yeah.
There are people like that. And it sounds like you especially take that in where if we're aware, as we're living those many different lives that you mentioned, that become an aspiration. That we go, man, I see that and I want to be like that. Like I saw Covey, right? Stephen Covey with his house up on the hill in Provo. And I'd be like, man, I want to achieve that kind of thing someday.
Right.
So I think there is value. In fact, this leads me to my next question. I don't want to spend the whole time on our service mission in Indianapolis, but I know that there's one person that's absolutely influential in your life, and he was in mine, which is G. Barton Payne.
Yeah.
Who was our leader as missionaries. And talk to me about the influence that he had in your life and what you learned from him.
Well, it's interesting because the way that they do these service missions, I think there's about 220 young men and women who volunteer. They pay actually to be there, so there's no income for them. They pay to go to a place. You don't know where you're going. You essentially write in, and then they assign you somewhere in the world. When I first got my mission call, I thought that it said India, and I had visions of like showering with a hose and, having an entirely different diet. And I was very nervous I did not want to go foreign. I wasn't ready for foreign at that time, and I reread the call, and luckily it changed to the basketball capital of America, in Indianapolis, which worked for me. And so when I first got out there, I was a really hard worker, but I didn't love it. And they had someone there named Robert Floto. And Robert was from Boise, Idaho. And Robert, I guarantee you, is an entirely solid person. You can't do one of those roles if you're not. But for whatever reason, he and I didn't get along at all. Mm-hmm. And it was really discouraging to me. I think he viewed me as fake. I think he viewed me as overbearing. I was not his style. And so when
I remember this. I could easily see that.
Yeah.
Again, great people, both of you, just opposite ends of the personality spectrum.
Yeah, and I wanted to go home. I didn't want to be there anymore when he was the guy. And I don't know if it would have worked out if he would have been the guy the entire time, but his 3 years was up. And so he came out like 3 months into that window. And then Gary Barton Payne came in. Gary was from Southern California. He invented the McDonald's Play Place and sold it to McDonald's worldwide. And so every kid who's ever played in the Play Place owes Bart and Sherma Payne a lot. DuPont, and I think it was DuPont that ended up buying that from him. And then it ended up doing a lot of the work when he gave up all those rights intentionally, and then went and led those groups. But he is incredibly sharp. He's still alive today.
It makes me realize I gotta reach out to him. I need to interview him for this.
Oh, you definitely should.
Yeah.
It'd be a great connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just up in Salt
Lake.
So
what's something that you learned from him? Like, what's one moment? Because I have a couple of those moments. What was one moment where he said something to you or he showed you something and it's always stuck with you?
Well, there's two. Gave a talk one time in front of a large group of people, and I thought it really went well. And he pulled me aside and he said, "David, when everything is emphasized, nothing is emphasized." And so apparently I must have emphasized everything in that talk, and hurt, by the way, but I knew it was coming from, a really good place. And then another time, and this is back again, in 1994 to 1996, he had like the Lexus LS 430 sedan. I mean, like, people didn't have these. They had like the Crown Victoria or a Ford Taurus. Right. This was like an extreme luxury car. Now, remember, he had that, and he definitely had the appearance of being very successful, and he was very successful. And and I complimented him on something. He was and is super sharp. And he got mad when I said something to him, and he said, "Do you know how hard I've worked to get here?" And he basically said, "I didn't just show up here. Like, this is from like years and years of trying to practice and get better." And again, I don't know what I said to him, but it stood out to me that, the people who are the best in their game are constantly like self-criticizing and working on it. And they don't take it for granted.
Yeah. Well, I think there really is this perception now, in particular, more than I've ever seen, that if someone's wealthy, they just got it easily. It just came to them. There's certainly trust fund babies, but it's not. I don't think it's
common. No,
and especially in your case, you worked for it. So that's a nice segue to go to one of the first jobs that I remember you having, because it's really we kind of kept working together in the same circles back and forth. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the first time you started selling phones for T-Mobile.
Yeah, I'll just give, like a tiny quick background. Right now, I'm the national vice president for T-Mobile USA. And if you're not familiar with T-Mobile's background, T-Mobile's the 40th largest company in the world, has a market cap value of $188 billion. And so I run their U.S. division for government or for public sector. But, fast forwarding, I've been with the company for 25 years. And so 25 years ago, June 23rd, I started as the very first employee in Walmart and store in store. And so basically you had a store presence within there, but you worked for the core company. And I was the very, very first person, in there. And either they had a lot of confidence in me or not any confidence at all. Is probably the latter. I had to fill in for people when they had their day off. And if you're in sales, the beauty of somebody who thinks about something is they come back to the location. And so that's a big disadvantage if you're not going to be at the same location. And somebody says, I'll think about it. And then I want to come back and do that. And so I had to be very good at connecting with people to have them want to meet me at, say, one store and then have to travel to a completely different store based on my work schedule to transact for me, because you could only transact in person. Back then it was carbon copies, 7 pieces of paper. Right. There was no digital work. It was that's how it worked. And if you wanted to be successful in any sales measure, you've got to hit your numbers and you've got to essentially be there. And I loved it. I'll still never forget, going through, they actually investigated me for fraud because I was so successful when we first started. And they had a person come in and shadow me to figure out how I was being so successful. And what they realized is that I was calling people out of a phone book because no one came to Walmart between 8 and 10 a.m. And so instead of just sitting there because of my prior business background with GE Healthcare and knocking on doors for 2 years in Indiana, I wasn't super intimidated by outreach. And so businesses were coming in and signing up with me for, 7 phones or 10 phones. And this is in a day where people were buying one.
That wasn't your purview.
No.
Your job was to just say hello to people who are coming through Walmart getting their Cheerios.
That's it.
Yeah, and that's your sales.
And it started my career. They pulled me out of that role because they were like, oh my gosh, we have this other thing for you, which is called business to business. And they pulled me out of that, and nobody made it in business to business. Everybody failed. And they said it was super scary, but they gave you the big dangling carrot of $32,000 a year. And I was probably making 12 or 11.
Plus the commissions.
No, that was all in.
I
remember having a goal that I would be able to buy a candy bar without having to budget for it. I'll never forget that. Wow. And I was like, man, if I could really make it, I could get a snack without having to literally line item budget that. And so it was a big turning point for me. And again, nothing's ever given to you. You got to go on.
Oh yeah, you created that for sure. See, I didn't know that part either. I just knew you were working at Walmart, and I don't know if it was necessarily a job that people wanted.
Probably not.
It wasn't perceived, I think, highly at the time. But you just took it and you go, I'm going to make this my own.
Well, I don't think I beat a lot of Harvard grads out for it. But it's interesting because some of the people that I started with have had really, really bright careers in communications even today. And so the original core of who was hired, there was a woman named Deb Hall she hired very well. I still look at the individuals and people who came out of that, and they've done quite well over time. But yeah, that was a founding point, and it's serendipity. You never know what you're getting into.
Yeah. And that was... by the way, when you went into that B2B, that's part of the time when we were working together is I went in and I did work there and failed pretty darn quickly. Like you said.
It's hard.
It's hard. And I realized it wasn't for me, but I learned some good lessons. What are a couple of lessons or principles of sales success that you learned early on in that B2B realm?
Well, if you're in sales or you're in B2B, very few people work an 8-hour day, by the way. They're at work for 8 hours a day, but they're not working 8-hour days.
I say this in my speeches. The amount of time you work includes the time spent thinking about work while at home. Because you're not a blacksmith in that role.
Right.
If you're thinking, you're working.
Yeah, you have to be really, really good in the windows, the wall of that 8 to 5 area. And a lot of people who aren't that successful don't work focused in those windows. And what they end up having to do is they always have to work late, or they always have to work weekends, or they always have to do whatever because they're making up for all the time that they skipped. That itself is a problem because then they're stressed. And it also puts them into working into non-productive hours. And what I mean by non-productive hours is there's a window where people are open to communicating, and there's a window where they aren't open to communicating. And so you sort of lose massive amounts of productivity if you are not focused during those windows and they don't know how much cash it's costing them.
Did I pick that up from you?
I don't know.
Because I teach time management, I teach productivity, and one of the things I talk about is using the right windows of time for the right type of work. Right. The time when you're going to be most likely to make sales is really like the couple of hours before and after lunch. right? First thing in the morning, everybody's too busy. At the end of the day, they're not going to think about it. I'm wondering if that's something I picked up from you along the way.
I don't know. You got to be careful because, it's easy to stereotype the right window to work and the wrong window to work, and who really knows what that is because individuals are so different. However,
in the context of what we were doing.
However, one thing is universal, and that is an 8 to 5, at least in the United States of America, is a pretty big window to get a hold of business owners or business leaders. And if you can't capture that, within those windows of time, and obviously we're moving into a window of artificial intelligence, we're moving into a window of social and digital connections, which drastically changes the old Glengarry, Glen Rock,
Sure.
got to call them, got to email them. In fact, email is becoming less and less effective. But what is effective is working 8 to 5 in whatever window that you are, and then also being very good at micro increments. And I think a lot of people mistake effort for influence. And if you can't build real relationships and you can't actually connect with people on a deeper level, you probably won't move the needle. So just being there and just going through motions doesn't do it, but actually truly connecting with people and having something that's monumental, I think, is really critical.
How do you do that? How do you connect with people on a deeper level in the current landscape that we have?
Yeah. Well, listen, anybody who sells any product is there to help fill a need. And you got to understand what the need is. And this goes back to my days of lawn mowing or whatever. You're there to serve. You're a service person is a different way to do it. And so, Dave, if you want something, my only goal is to give you what you want and make sure that you love it and that you're happy and that what we are giving you is legitimate and that you truly find value in it. And so that's not a quote unquote sales pitch. That's questions about, Dave, what do you want? What do you want to do? How do you want to do it?
Yes.
What are you willing to pay for it? And why is that even relevant for you? And if you find that your product doesn't fit those spaces, you're probably in trouble. But just asking questions and serving is like really where it's at.
And right there, you defined what I think is one of the biggest mistakes that people in sales make, which is they try to sell people what they want to sell people, right?
They went through a training and they heard,
or I know I'm going to get a bigger commission from this, or even just, I think what's right for you. And when you take that approach to sales, you're not successful and you're just going to make people angry. When your approach is figuring out what they want, then you can properly steer them into what is really what they want rather than trying to manipulate them, which I think people now are really don't want. They can tell.
Telling the truth is all about credibility. And I'll never forget in the early days when coverage wasn't as ubiquitous as it was, one of the first questions people would ask is, hey, where does your connectivity or your coverage, work or lead? And you'd get so much more credibility off of saying it doesn't work here and here, and you need to know that up front. And so if you intended to use this service or product in these areas, I just need to disclose to you that it may not work there. Here's where it does work, and here's the information. And if they asked a question where a competitor may have an advantage, answering that truthfully is really important, even if it means that they picked a competitor's product, because they can trust you. And so, like in my world, when I first started in the phone business, when I wanted them to think of communications, I wanted them to think of me. They didn't have to think of what was at the time VoiceStream or now T-Mobile USA. They just had to think of communications and truth and know that I would genuinely tell them the right information. And it's hard to stay neutral when you go through trainings to be in somewhat bias to push a product. But if you can be at a place of truth and honestly answer people's questions and give them the information, they'll make the decision versus you having to sway them.
So here's a connection that I'm making in my head as you're saying that. Neutrality requires volume. Right? Because if you're going to send people to a competitor, that means that you're just automatically going to lose some of the sales just because you're being honest. So that means you better be contacting a lot of people and building relationships with a lot of people, which goes back to your background, which is hard work, where you fought for everything that you had. You were able to make more than enough sales because you were just meeting so many people and then treating them honestly and fairly.
Yeah, you give them the information to make the decision. And think about who my clients are today. My clients are Chicago PD, their New York Department of Education. They are, White House Communications, the U.S. Department of Treasury, United States Postal Services. And so picture a winter blizzard in the middle of nowhere, and a mail carrier has an issue with their Jeep or vehicle that goes down. And does it matter if what we told them was accurate and if something worked or didn't work?
Yeah, they're depending on
think about a police officer, first responder pulling over a warranted felon who is armed and dangerous. And like this year, 50% more police officers have been shot in the line of duty than ever before. It's a very, very dangerous job, and there's a lot of vacancies in these roles, and it's a changing shift in the safety and security of America based upon things that have happened within the profession. And so think about the level of accuracy or not when you're there, and you've got to be very accurate and leveled in the communication.
So just that moment that you shared with us, it showed a level of understanding. And I'm sure you could go on for quite a while about all of the things that police officers need and what's appropriate for them. Is that a matter of homework? Or is it a matter of conversations that you're having with them, or is it both?
It's both. Okay. Yeah, because serendipity, I think, is defined as discovering things along your path, right? And you're not going to have all the answers the entire time, and research and fact checking is really important. And also surrounding yourself with teams who can get you the data and who can accurately represent, what that is. One of the things I've said, I love shoes, by the way. I absolutely love shoes.
You got a fine pair on right now.
Thank you so much. If I worked at Nike and I just was with the Nike executives at the Major League Baseball Home Run Derby and All-Star Game up in Seattle at T-Mobile Park, it was a ton of fun. When we were talking, if I sold shoes, the shoes are every bit as comfortable in Alabama as they are in Wyoming, and they don't change a lot. But a wireless product changes a lot in terms of topography, and people are also moving with the object. It may work in one place and then they move, they go on vacation or they go, somewhere else, and then that they're relying on that working. And so you've got to have a lot of teams that can help you do that. And so take my job out of it and put in any job. Just center yourself in truth. Center yourself in accurate information. If your product is inferior and it's a better value, people need to know that. If your product is superior and it's more money, people need to understand, where the ROI is.
I didn't say this yet, but I would say, and part of the reason why I'm asking questions about sales, and sometimes someone listening to this says, that doesn't apply to me, I'm not in sales, which no matter what you're doing, it does. But you are on what I think of as my Mount Rushmore of sales.
Thank you.
One of them, I think Sam Dark.
Yeah, Sam's incredible.
Yeah, so Sam's up there. Dean Carroll is another one. He's someone who's a LinkedIn learning instructor that I've gotten to know. I've still got a fourth slot open. I'm still figuring out who that is.
I've got some names for you.
Okay. All right. Well, I haven't met them yet. But just explain briefly why someone who has nothing to do with sales, let's say that they're a nurse or, they're a writer, and they don't have to sell to people. Why is learning those principles so important to their success, no matter what it is that they're trying to accomplish?
Well, so sales is influencing, by the way. It's a different way to do that. You're monetizing influence is probably the best way to define it.
Okay.
And so really what you're doing if you're a nurse or you're a writer or whatever is you actually may or may not be monetizing your influence. And I want to break that down for just a second. The reason I got into sales, there was an instructor that I took a college class voluntarily 3 times, and it's the only time I've ever voluntarily taken a class more than once. I have involuntarily taken a class in college more than once, but voluntarily, it was the only time, and it was called an organizational behavior class, and it was by Dave Litchford. And Dave was an unbelievable professor. And Dave said in every single situation, someone is selling someone something. You might as well be paid for it. And I'm going to give you just a quick breakdown of that.
Okay, please.
Dave, if you wanted to go see the movie Barbie and I wanted to go see the movie Oppenheimer or vice versa, and we're at an impasse on which movie, we're probably going to go see a movie together. And someone will influence whether we see Barbie or Oppenheimer. And or you want to go to one restaurant, I want to go to another restaurant. In some situations, someone's going to influence what restaurant you go to. And people have persuasive powers and capabilities. And as long as that's done the right way, asking good questions, describing words with detail, I think about people who are in the restaurant business. And Dave, would you rather have a piece of lettuce that I've touched with my hands and set on a plate, or would you rather have a hand-tossed salad?
Well, that's obvious.
They're the exact same thing,
Right.
but it's described differently.
So the description of it and how you're presenting it to people is going
articulation.
To be useful in any situation.
I think nurses call it bedside manner.
Sure. Okay.
I think,
using that example that you threw out, but
an author may call it articulation. And you know it when you see it as a human being. You can see it from a million miles away when it's done beautifully.
Yeah. I think that's a great principle. I just fell out of the fourth person. I know who the fourth person is. It's my agent, Matt Wagner.
Matt?
Yeah, he's amazing.
That's
Building
cool.
relationships with people. Talk to me about loyalty, especially to T-Mobile, because right now it's almost negative when someone says, "Oh, you're going to work for a company for 25 years and you're going to stay with them." What you have done is pretty remarkable in 2023. Was that a conscious choice from the beginning? Was that something your parents instilled in you? Or was it a choice that you've been making over and over and over to continue to stay loyal to T-Mobile?
Yeah, you got to fight for your right to party. The Beastie Boys had that one down. And, you can't be with a Fortune 40 company or a Fortune 100 company or a Fortune 150 company for longer than a decade if you're not really good. They're going to make enough changes that you just won't survive. So first of all, you better be really good if you're going to have tenure and window and be in a senior level led position. Oftentimes vice presidents or akin directors may have a shelf life of 3 years. And there's very high goals and very high objectives. And so one, having the ability to be there is one thing. Second one is having the choice to be there. I've certainly had a couple of very, very incredible companies approach me and give generous offers to be able to lead very large portions of their organizations. Yeah. Some of those being on a global basis, by the way. And there's a few things that play into it. One, T-Mobile's allowed me to live where I want to live and where my kids are able to be around grandmas, grandpas, cousins, and they're willing to fund flights and travel. And I think that their centering around my well-being is paying back in huge dividend.
Which that's a principle of sales itself, right? Going back to what you said, being aware of what people want, being aware of what they prioritize. So whoever's been your leader, and however the organization is set up, they've been aware of what you want and family's a priority, so they're going to feed that.
Well, and Dave, who I've worked with and for is mind-blowing. Matt Millen. Matt Millen was Tony Robbins' number 2, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And so he was my boss for a number of years. I love Matt, but Matt was incredible. Mike Katz, who's T-Mobile's chief marketing officer right now and president of marketing, reporting to our CEO, was somebody that I had a chance to work underneath. And if you meet Mike, I mean, you can't help but be attracted, speaking of Mount Rushmore, of big thinking and great ideas. The current person that I work for is named George Fisher. George was previously the head of Verizon Business. I don't know if there's somebody naturally funnier than George Fisher. The guy is incredible. I literally can say I adore my boss and would almost do anything in the kind of culture that he brings to the table. And I have to mention just briefly, John Ledger. And people, if you don't know John Ledger, he came in as CEO in 2012. And John would often leave rooms with no shoes because people would say, "I want your shoes." And he would take his shoes off and give people his shoes. Or he had hundreds of dollars in his pocket. And if you got up and asked a question, you'd get $100 from his personal fund. If you sang the question, you would get $200. And so he had a great way of creating culture. And then finally, Mike Sievert, who's the current CEO of the company, and President Callie Field. These leaders are incredible. Mike ran Microsoft's global marketing arm and in prior, and he is probably the single smartest business person I've ever met. And I just actually was at MC with Satya, who is Microsoft CEO, and Mike Sievert on stage. And I had a chance to be the MC of that meeting. And so some of the world's most powerful leaders, and so if you get a chance to work with and around and learn from people like that and they treat you well, it's tough to leave. And it's probably more about trying to earn your spot on the team and be on a team, because there's a lot of people in the world who want that spot, versus do I stay because they're going to pay you really well and they're going to treat you really good.
Yeah. So if I'm going to summarize part of what you were saying, one is it's the people, It's the people that you've been with, the influence that they've had in their life, the kind of people that you want to associate. And then I think it sounds like there's the aspirational aspect of it, which has always been a part, as we've now heard your story, you see the Hershey's, right? You see the home, you see everything that they've got, and you want to aspire to that. You see these different people who are doing things, and you go, I want to be like that. I want to have that. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. All right. So part of what I preach in this show is balanced success.
Okay.
So it's not just about the money you make. It's not just your career goals, but also family and the things that you're doing for the world, the good things that you're doing, the cause that you're supporting. Talk to me about the influence that your family has had on your success. And you can talk about both marriage and your kids.
Yeah, well, family is what it's all about, by the way. And I go back to just my grandparents. I had 4 incredible grandparents, Leo Bevan, my mom's father, Lucille Bevan, Mary Bezzant, and Jim Bezzant. And my grandparents were incredible influences on me. I'll never forget my grandfather telling me that if you work for someone, you need to work hard to give them back more than they give you. And I know a lot of people don't think like that in these days. And by the way, in my line of work, that's hard to do because companies are so generous and they're so good that it's hard to give them more back than what they're going to ultimately give you. And so that had always stuck with me. But you go back to family, and family is what it's all about. My wife, Lori, I've got 3 kids, Ayla, Emmy, and Luca. And they inspire me.
How old are they?
Luca's,
right now?
Luca's 9, Emmy's 13, and Isla is 17.
Okay.
And, Isla, is made for the 4th year in a row, one of the best high school soccer teams here in the state. And she's got 2 scholarship offers from universities next year and hopefully going to more ID camps and getting more offers. And watching her work ethic and watching her defy the odds inspires me. Her days are 7 a.m. and she's not home at 9:30. She's done at 9:30, then comes home and does homework and is one of the toughest, hardest working people I've ever met. My little boy, Luca, has had a chance to train with Corbin Levin, who is Pleasant Grove High School's wrestling coach. And Pleasant Grove, for those who haven't known, is the winningest wrestling program in the state of Utah. And Corbin won 3 state titles directly. And he's got a little boy that is Luca's age. And he's been nice to let them hang out with varsity. And so these kids are doing incredible things. And by the way, whether they weren't or weren't, they're like spirits, inspire me. And, my wife's amazing. And so it's really all about that and everything. They're the sort of center of the universe and everything else, goes around them.
I have to call this out or bring attention to what you just did because this is who I know you to be and who you've always been. You talk about someone, you've got to take a couple of paragraphs and build them up and talk about what they've done. I'm not saying what they did wasn't everything you talked about. It is. But your awareness of what people are doing and what they're accomplishing, and you're even extending that to your kids, right? You're always so complimentary of people and building them up. You're a vice president, right?
Fortune 40
company. How do you make time for your family? How do you make time for those other things that are important?
Couple things. I don't walk in the door and take calls, by the way. And so I take all the calls before I walk in the door. So it doesn't mean I'm not taking the calls. I take all the calls. But when I walk through the door, I walk through the door and I'm going to be 100% them. But when I walk through, they're not confused as to my time or attention with them. Where possible, weekends are theirs exclusively. They get 1 guaranteed vacation a year, which is spring break, and they know what it is and they get to pick it. And I'm 100% there during those windows. And so I've got a system where they know when I'm going to be there and where they know I'm going to be available. I fly 143 times a year. And so, Delta Airlines knows me really well and I know them really well.
Yeah.
And so when I'm there, I have to make the time count, but I schedule around their events. And so when an important thing comes up, the answer is no, I can't be there today. I can be there tomorrow or the next day and move heaven and earth to do it. But I have XYZ event today, and that child is going to take priority because those 18 fast years, they're a blink.
Oh, so true. And thank you for your example with that. It's so critical. And I think a lot of people say, well, to reach that level of success in corporation, you got to give up family. You got to give up those things. But you're saying, I'm making them the top priority, and I'm scheduling
Dave,
the rest around.
not if you work 8 to 5. Almost none of their events are happening between 8 and 5. Some of them are, but not very many. A lot of them are after hours. And so if you show up 8 to 5, you get permission to be there at night.
You've got to be so efficient during that 8 to 5.
You do. And by the way, I have the luxury of having an incredible assistant as well.
Thank you for bringing that up.
So assistants everywhere, you're incredible because they do run and manage schedules. And also getting somebody who's aware of your life and making it all work is I know you do, Dave. I know that's how I even got in with you, right?
Yeah, Victoria is absolutely amazing. I wouldn't be able to do the things we were talking about, my schedule, my time off. I wouldn't be able to do that without her.
Anne runs my world. So,
and just kind of a little callback, I actually learned the value of an assistant, at least in part, from watching you. When we were at, I guess it was Voice Stream at the time.
Yeah,
we were
Voice Stream.
I remember seeing you get your assistant for the first time, and everything got better for you. Would you not?
No, it's organization.
Because you were a little, if I remember right, you were a little disorganized. Fantastic with the sales skills, fantastic with the people building skills, but sometimes you were falling behind on paperwork and stuff like that.
Well, you can only keep up with a certain amount of volume.
Well, and also because you're just making so many deals happen, how can you keep up? And then you got an assistant. And man, you started taking off with it. Yeah.
Assistants can change the world. I have to turn down 3 meetings for every 1 meeting I take. And saying no is important.
Yes.
But saying no the right way is also important. And it is, I am not able to do it, but here's who can. Let me get you to them. And so giving your permission to say no. And if you're a pleaser and you want to make people happy or you want to win, that is one of the hardest things that you'll ever deal with. It still hurts my soul to say no to engagements that you want to be at, but you only have a certain amount of time and you're going to have to pick where you're going to have to be. It is a big, big leveler of where you're going to maybe end up.
Absolutely. I teach in my courses, whenever you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Yeah, and be true. If you're going to do it,
Yes,
right?
Sir.
And otherwise say, I can't do it, so that you're not telling someone something you're not going to live into.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one thing I have to ask before we end. Talk to me about Bezzant Farms.
Oh, yeah. So you heard my earlier background in growing up with my grandfather owning farms. When his mother and father died, they had 50 acres, by the way, that got pared down to 22. And the land became more and more valuable because it was urban, and he never sold. And so again, he worked 2 jobs, never had a lot of money, very, very humble person, an incredible inspiration to me. And he could have cashed out easily and lived a very luxurious lifestyle. He never did, but he did. But what happened is when his parents passed, they sold land, and his sister never talked to him again because he supposedly got the better piece of land than she got. Okay. And so he didn't want that to happen. And so he ended up saying, well, cash is an equal dividend, and that he was going to put the farm up for sale and all of his kids would end up getting the benefit. And at the time, I didn't have enough money to buy that many acres of urban land. It was a fairly hefty price tag, and I really wanted to. And I owned several homes. One of them was in Arizona, and we, had owned the home, and, it was furnished and it was brand new. And it's like, why would you ever want to sell if you have a warm weather location? And I kept having this dream that said, sell your home, sell your home, sell your home. And I told my wife, I'm like, I don't know why, but we need to sell our Arizona home and property. And we did, and we made some pretty good money off of doing it. 3 weeks later, and by the way, all of my grandfather's farms were sold, including his house and his urban farm.
Okay.
3 weeks after I sold that property, the developer who bought all of it had knocked down the place where I lived, everything except my parents' home, because they owned it, and became real estate. They didn't keep any trees. It still breaks my heart to this day. And they were getting ready to do the same thing with the smaller property where my grandfather's home was and that land was at. And they called the city and asked the city if the city would buy it to put a water tank on, because he had changed his mind for whatever reason. And the city called me and told me about it, or I wouldn't have known about it. And so I called the developer and said, hey, I'd be interested. He said, look, I'm a developer, and you're going to have to pay more than the land is worth because, the development value is higher than what it would appraise for, which means you can't get a loan, which means that, you'd have to have equity to be able to do that. Had we not sold our home when we sold it and knowing how fast he could do a transaction because of who he was and what was happening, I was in position to be able to buy my grandfather's home and the original land back, plus buy adjacent properties to expand it. And so it was a huge thing for me in 2015. And by the way, on my grandfather's birthday, April 2nd, reestablished April 2nd, 2015, Bezzant Farms, and then redo the house. And we donate 90% of the produce to families in need where they don't have to pay anything if they want delicious cherries, apples, peaches, and pears. And it's been honestly, my wife's my love of my life, but if I had a second, it would be this farm. And
I can tell.
It's just been awesome.
Yeah, when I saw the post that showed it, and then I saw that you said you come in and you pay whatever you want to pay.
Yeah.
Right. And
if you have money, you can pay. We'll take your money.
Right.
But if you don't have money, just take the produce.
Yeah. And so you just show people.
No questions asked.
No questions asked. They just take.
You either pay or you don't.
Delicious fruit.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I teared up a little.
There's no conversation. It's just you decide.
That to me is just so amazing. Is that something you have your kids work in? Like how's it?
It
run?
was designed. It was designed to have those kids get their hands dirty, right? And
I love that.
they've had a bit of a silver spoon, and they're great about it. They love it too, and it just takes me square back. Speaking of roots, like literal roots of where it all began, and it is so soul healing for me to have that property, and it'll never be sold. It'll go into a trust, and it will survive, generation after generation. And it's one of the things that I'm the most proud of in my lifetime.
Yeah. I think that's so beautiful. And again, it's just the balanced success that you've achieved. Not only do you have these roots with your family, but you're doing so much for the community, and you're creating this thing for your kids to learn that work ethic.
Dave, it's a miracle. I mean, I don't know how you feel about your career of being a published author, three published books, 5 written, I think more to come, from you, being in all the stages around the world. You talked about Covey, you talked about where you're heading, and it's a miracle that some of these things have happened, and you just have to be thankful for every day and, give your very best to life and appreciate what you have.
Yeah, it's beautiful. All right. So here's the point in the podcast where I wrap things up. And when you'll appreciate this, right? It's not about the things that you learn. It's about what you do.
Yeah.
It's about the application of the knowledge that you have. So I want people who are listening to this, they've heard your story, they've learned some things from you. I want you to make David Bezzant a part of your life forever, right? There are things that you taught, and I go, oh man, he was a part of my life forever because of that thing I learned. So what I'm going to do, Dave, I'm going to share 3 principles that someone listening to it, they can apply immediately.
Yeah.
They can do it today. They can do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Don't wait a week. Don't wait a month. Do it now. And you only have to do one of these. So I'm going to share 3. You can share 1 or 2 when I'm done. So the first one, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And it was Jason Lee, okay? And the principle here was stand up for someone and bring them under your wing. And you can do that as a mentor. You can do that with anyone in your life. But that moment really kind of set your feet.
It did.
On a different direction. So if you're aware, those of you who are listening, be aware of someone who might need you to stand up for them, and maybe you can bring them under your wing, and maybe you can mentor them and set them on the right path. So, just ask yourself, is there someone in my life that needs that? The second one, gosh, this just keeps coming over and over again, but, build people up, get to know people, appreciate the value of people, and, think about people you work with. And whenever you talk about them, do things to compliment them and to recognize them and remember them by name. Did you hear how many names David Bezzant brought up? And he's not doing that to name drop. He's doing that to name build. He's building people with that. And that's part of who he is, giving respect to people and just constantly recognizing the things that they're doing. No one can have contact with you, David, and come away and go, man, I don't feel like he made me feel like $1 million, right? That's who you are. And then, gosh, there's so many principles, but here's one that I wrote down, which is the research. You said the phrase, center yourself in truth. And that applies in sales, that applies in anything. Rather than trying to pretend that something is what it's not, know what it truly is. And then when you're making a decision or you're helping someone else, you're influencing them to make a decision, you can be truthful. and take the time to do that research and to listen so that you really know what you're talking about, not just pretending to know what you talk about. So those are a few principles. What might you add of something that someone can do immediately?
Yeah. Well, Dave, just super quickly on that last one, you're going to have to know what you do well. And maybe more importantly, or equally important, you're going to have to know what your competitors do well. And you're going to have to be honest that your competitors actually do things well within the industry. And then you have to be able to properly position to someone's accurate needs. And by the way, it doesn't mean you need to sell your competitor's product. It just means that you need to be aware they do things well.
Are they superior but cost more, or are they a better deal but maybe not as much? They cost less.
There's just a couple of things. And the thing that I would tell anybody is never underestimate somebody else's value, no matter who they are. Dave, you talked about somebody being worth $1 million. They're worth more than that. And every single person you meet they might be your lawn boy. They might be cleaning your office. They might be your, support team. They might be, who knows who they are, but no matter who they are, everybody's just trying to make it. They are. And, they're all trying to eat. They're all trying to feel important. They're all trying to have esteem. And so it's beautiful. Pull people up and pull them with you and try and take away the biases. That would be something that I would ask of anybody out there. And life is pretty cool when you get a chance to just appreciate the show of, all these gifted people that are around you, regardless of background. And the second thing I would maybe tell people is you have to take yourself seriously. I'm a big fan of UFC or Ultimate Fighting and what goes into that skill, having a son that wrestles and watching how incredibly hard wrestling is, watching the next level of that, which is Ultimate Fighting. Dana White said something, who's the president of the UFC, that I thought was a really, really powerful statement. And somebody asked Dana why he doesn't fight in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And he said, because he considers what happens when you lose. And he said that real fighters do not ever believe that they're going to lose. They 100% of the time that they walk out, they believe that they're going to win. And there's not an alternate method of what do I do if I lose. And I thought it was really, really powerful. And I think for anybody out there, you have to believe in yourself that every single day that you're going to win. And if it's not you, then who is it going to be? Why isn't it going to be you? Why have you rationalized off that it's somebody else that's going to be the leader, or somebody else that's going to do great, or somebody else is going to show up? Why isn't it going to be you? And I came to that conclusion really young somehow, some way, where I'm like, you know what? I can do it. I'm the person that I'm going to count on. And, I'm not going to have to look around for somebody else to show up or to do it. And so if I could just give any point of emphasis, treat people with their real worth, which is infinite, and believe in yourself and show up every day like there's no alternative, and you're going to win.
Powerful stuff. Thank you so much,
Dave. Good to see you. Congratulations on all your success, Dave.
Thank you.
It's amazing.
Thank you. I knew that we were going to have a trip down memory lane. I knew that there was a great story that you were going to share with us, because you have a remarkable story. What I didn't expect, which is silly, I should have, was how much I remember you've had an influence on my life. So thank you.
Back at you, Dave.
Thank you for that.
And by the way, for those of you who don't know, this man can sing, and he needs to publish. He needs to republish, because I can't find his work.
You can find my piano stuff.
We need to get your voice and piano stuff republished. This man can sing. So if you did not know that, extremely talented musician, including author, speaker, and incredible business leader. And by the way, I know he's expensive, but get him out and listen to him at your meetings or your conventions. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this. Remember, it's not about the knowledge that you heard. It's about the action that you take on that knowledge. So think about what you learned and pick one thing and do that. You'll make Dave Bezzant a part of your life forever. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
You've been listening to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, hosted by my dad, Dave Crenshaw, and produced by Invaluable Incorporated. Sound editing was done by my brother, Stratton Crenshaw. Research and assistant production by Victoria Bedez. Voiceover by me, Darcy Crenshaw. And the music is by Ryan Brady via Pond 5 licensing. Please subscribe to the Dave Crenshaw Success Project on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. See you next time.